So,
As you all hear every month, um, Critical Connections is about encouraging and enhancing um, critical writing in ceramics. And our recordings then go on to YouTube, where they're under Critical Connections in Ceramics and Craft. And I think our attendance here has gone down since I've been putting them up because people think, well, I'll just watch the the video. But anyway, I'm really pleased to have Maria Porges, is that how you
mhm,
pronounce it, here
yes.
today. Um, and I'd like to thank Nancy for suggesting you, which is great. But I had just not long ago read an essay by you in the front of a Robert Brady catalog. It was done several years ago, I think, and I was writing an article on him. But anyway, take it away, Maria.
Okay. Did you turn sharing on for me?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. I always have this problem. Is full screen going to be good enough? No, I want presenter view, don't I?
Um, no,
Slideshow.
then we'll see their
There you
slideshows
go.
if you want. Yeah. And then people can even diminish their pictures of the people on the
Okay.
side.
All right. So I thought today I would talk about how I became an art writer and what I see the current landscape for writing about art and craft as being like here in the Bay Area. So I've been both a wordsmith of one kind or another, critic, storyteller, poet, and simultaneously a maker for as long as I can remember. Consequently, the fact that I can draw and tell stories made me believe that these were unimportant skills. Eventually, though, they would turn out to be the very things that would help me bootstrap my way into an adult life that has consisted largely of doing both. First, tiny bit of backstory. After I got my MFA from the University of Chicago, I moved to the Bay Area in 1979. This I felt was my place as much as anywhere else, having been born here during the decade my parents were grad students on the GI Bill at UC Berkeley after World War II. It's my mom on the left and my dad on the right. After some fits and starts in my new life, I eventually figured out a way to make a living with a craft business. It was the early 80s and you could do that. I bought a kiln and moved into a warehouse. So there I was painting these cute visual puns on trivets and making great big drawings. This is about 4 by 6 feet, trying to figure out what comes next and how to like it, to quote the great American poet Stephen Dobbins. I had also started writing poetry seriously after grad school, reading my work at bookstores and hanging out with poets and publishing work in little magazines, thinking maybe that was the creative endeavor I was supposed to be following. Young people are so naive. One night in 1986, I went to a party. The people there were recent graduates of various local MFA programs, but were already showing their work, and I felt very intimidated. I did wander into a conversation, though, about a particular exhibition I'd actually seen. I ventured an opinion about the person's work. The discussion continued. I had something to contribute about a couple of other shows. Finally, the one person in the group I didn't know turned to me and said, "You certainly seem to have a lot to say. Maybe you should be a critic," and walked off. Are you seeing the your screen sharing thing on your screen or not?
Seeing what?
Nothing. Well, never mind. You would have told me.
No.
Oddly
Okay.
enough, the friend who had brought me to this party introduced the same subject only a week later. She had decided to start writing for Art Week, a weekly tabloid paper published locally that consisted of reviews of mostly Northern California shows. "You're a writer," she said confidently. I had been sharing poems with her. "You should write for them too." I thought about it. Why not? There was a history of poets writing art criticism: Frank O'Hara, John Ashbery, Bill Berkson. I went to see a show at a downtown San Francisco gallery, ceramic sculpture by Tony Hepburn, who I really admired. This is literally the only picture I could find of work from that period, which I think is very sad. His presence on the internet is tiny.
Mm.
I had studied reviews in Art Week, surmising that there was a form to them. Following that form, I wrote about the show and mailed my sample review to the editor and owner, Cecile McCann. She called me 2 days later and said, "When can you start?" Okay, so remember, this was before the internet. We would see a show on Thursday or Friday it opened, go home, write furiously, then submit the review on Monday, mailing it or driving it to Art Week's office in downtown Oakland. Cecile would edit it and get it back to us. I can't even remember how exactly, but the turnaround was surprisingly quick, considering that it mostly happened by mail. Reviews needed to be out in a timely way so that people could still go see a show after reading them. That was important to her. We surely never had more than 10 days or 2 weeks for the entire cycle. The next year, 1987, I wrote something for the publication of many issues. It was a great education because Cecile was such a good editor. I had essentially faked my way through college and grad school, flim-flamming teachers with style rather than rigor, and the discipline of criticism, such as it was, taught me a lot. I wrote both short reviews and front page features for the publication. However, I made less than $600 for the year, as the reviews paid $25 for the front page, and for reviews paid $25, and for the front page $35, later $50. Yes, it was the late 80s and early 90s, and money bought more than it does now, but just the same, it was already clear to me that nobody was doing this for the big bucks. That, in fact, might have been why Cecile had been so eager for me to start writing for Art Week. Recruitment was not easy. In any case, I soon started writing for several other publications, many of which no longer exist, though many of the ones pictured here are still published. I wrote for Sculpture, an American Craft, those are on the left side, not to be confused with Ceramics Monthly, that's next to American Craft in the bottom row, which was not to be confused with Ceramics Monthly, but rather a very slick review publication put out by that ne'er-do-well Harry Dennis. I wrote for Glass and for all of the other publications on this list eventually. Notably, I became the West Coast correspondent for a fancy international magazine called Contemporanea, published in an English language edition as well as an Italian edition. It only lasted 3 years. It was the last one in and the first one to go broke after the 1989-90 art world collapse. Because remember, magazines lived by advertising. And when they went down, they owed everyone money, especially the translators. Around that same time, maybe 1991, I also started writing reviews and very occasional features for Artforum, which I have continued doing with a couple of lengthy breaks until today. It has been a varied experience. It's all about who you have to work with, what language quirks they have, and how many rounds of editing you can stand. One time I quit for 9 years because I refused to verbify nouns. Breaking in had a
Good
different,
for you.
yeah, breaking in had a different meaning when there were more than 24 publications one might approach. Now, when students ask me what they should or could do to publish their writing, it's hard to figure out what to tell them. There are still a number of publications, not only the big ones like Artforum and Art in America, or, God help us, Art News, but the Manhattan Art Review, which is actually entirely the work of a single person, and the Brooklyn Rail. And there are some in Los Angeles that are LA-centric. Art and Cake still exists, I believe. Maybe Artillery? I'm not really sure. Here in San Francisco, until very recently, there was something called Square Cylinder, which I have in the list of active publications on the right, but now belongs in the list on the left, like 3 or 4 others of those. Sadly, even though it was finally starting to make money, The fellow who founded it had to quit to take care of his partner, and there's no one else to take it on. He tried to talk me into it, and I was, no, you're crazy. Over the years, several publications have started up on the West Coast. In fact, Art Forum did, mostly, but not always, in Los Angeles, enduring for various lengths of time and then folding. Art Issues was wonderful. San Francisco Art Space published a beautiful magazine called Shift until the money ran out. Shotgun Review was great, reviews only, and while the show was up, like Art Week had once been, but it got rolled into Daily Serving, which died after coming under the institutional sponsorship of CCA, where I teach. At the same time that I was writing for all those magazines, I was also building a career as an artist. This is an early piece. The common thread that this work had was, oh, there are men out there, she said with a kind of charred enthusiasm. My advice to you is just put on a little lipstick and stand still so they can find you. She got into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw her putting on her gloves. What the early work had in common was a lot of use of found material in the presence of text in one form or another, actual or implied. A lot of books. I started showing work in the early 90s, but when in 1992, I was one of the 3 artists who received the SF MoMA's Society for the Encouragement of Contemporary Art Prize, a kind of emerging artist award here in the Bay Area. It was still a big surprise to many of the gallerists and PR people I had already been dealing with. That's the old museum. The new one is so much fancier. San Francisco at that time, though, had a very vigorous alternative space, and up to then, I had been showing in those spaces rather than commercial galleries. In 1993, though, I signed on with John Bergruen, one of the Bay Area's few blue chip galleries. These cast wax vessels were both in my first show with him, and either pose or answer one of life's most important questions. Why do we learn on the left? Curiosity, fear, desire, or need. And on the right, where does dust come from? A decade of more writing and making followed, a lot of very refined cast wax, bronze, and glass pieces. Reviews, catalog essays, solo shows in Chicago at Carrie Sechrist Gallery, in Seattle with James Harrison, in New Orleans with Arthur Roger. Since 1988, I had also been writing scripts for museum audio guides. Good moneymaker, mostly for blockbuster shows, many of them covering various aspects of Impressionism, lots of aspects of Impressionism, but other things too, some 65 scripts in all. But all of these activities were reduced considerably by the birth of my daughters in 2001. Oh, and I changed my work, and my dealer no longer liked it. This show in 2003, my last show at Bergruen, was entirely dominated by destructive devices, bombs and Molotov cocktails made out of a wide range of materials. On the wall, that's wax terracotta bombs. On the pedestal, that's knitted felted bombs. And on the wall, Molotov cocktails. They weren't really. This is Bomb School, Atom, Bug, and Cherry, and the knitted bombs again. This was bad enough, apparently, but the solo show that I had at the De Rosa Museum in Napa in 2008, which focused on the Enlightenment, the devaluation of intuition in favor of rational thought, education in general, and raising girls, that was kind of it for my bankability as an artist. I began to focus on getting serious about teaching. I'd always thought when I was younger that someday I would do that. It sort of goes along with being opinionated at parties and knowing how to spell. In any case, that's what happened. I'm currently a professor at California College of the Arts, mostly guiding MFA students how to write about art, their own and other people's, and even leading some classes in the visual and critical studies program. Though honestly, much of their curriculum mystifies me. I am the kind of critic, after all, who relies on telling the story. Notice, describe, explain. I live in the Bay Area for a variety of reasons. I did grow up, though, just north of Chicago, and that is where my work ethic and Midwestern manners come from. It was when I lived in Japan, however, pictured here, between graduating from college and starting grad school, that I learned some important things that formed my career path as much as anything else. For a year, I was apprenticed to a potter. I've never studied ceramics in school in the United States, though I've taught it from time to time. The first thing I learned is that it is possible to be a wonderful artist and an awful person. My teacher was both of those things. Here's some of his work. This firsthand knowledge of the fact that even famous artists are just fallible people, which might seem obvious to you, but was not to me, was part of what made it possible for me to interview art world gods back in the first years of my art writing career. That, in turn, led to the knowledge that I too could aspire to being an artist, mere mortal though I was. The other thing I learned in Japan had to do with clay. I started out with traditional apprentice tasks and worked my way up to making production ware, though only little stuff, nothing like these big spectacular pieces. Lots and lots of sake cups. My teacher was a highly regarded artist making a very nice living, and that was my model for success. When I came home, though, into the art and craft world of the late 70s and early 80s, these two universes were still largely separate, each with its own galleries, publications, and collectors. It was quite difficult to make work out of clay and get taken seriously in the art world. Well, unless you had a penis, that is. And in any case, I was much more interested in being an artist at that point, even though I wrote criticism for parallel publications that catered to both universes. So essentially, I put clay aside. Until recently, that is. I've been described once or twice as the Swiss Army knife of CCA, meaning I have actually taught a really wide variety of classes in many different programs. This has even included a ceramics studio class in 2018 as a last-minute substitute, on the assumption, as the chair said to me, working with clay is like riding a bicycle. You don't forget how. He knew about my past. As it turns out, that is correct. That little piece on the right is from 1980 and might be the only thing, to my knowledge, hold on, that remains from that time as proof of my earlier skills. While teaching the studio class, though, I experimented with marble and clay using some of my old plaster molds, but it didn't come to much, so I put these things away again. However, in 2019, having officially now become part of the ceramics faculty, one of the 5 programs I am now part of, I was tasked with the future job of teaching a world history class for ceramics majors, something which was originally meant to consist of museum field trips and visits to artist studios. Hijacked by the pandemic, however, this fall 2020 class became an online orgy of asynchronic, pre-recorded lectures, some 18 of them covering everything from Neolithic figures to Mesoamerican vessels to contemporary work, everything. For months, I wrestled with thousands of images, basically staying a lecture ahead of the class. I would research, furiously write, record, upload, and then start all over. Afterwards, in January of 2021, I was more or less at a loss as to what to be doing in the studio, having cycled through and completed several bodies of work in the intervening years since I'd started to teach. Collages, book sculpture, which I had done before, work about memorial and hair. That drawing of a chair on the right is life-size. I'd even started a blog called Words About Art. You are welcome to go and take a look at it, on which I posted essays about things that interested me, including several about mending as a practice across all media, art and craft. I thought about writing a book on the subject, but, well, COVID kind of killed my momentum, and now I have other interests. When I was a little kid, I had a book full of illustrations of zoo animals that allowed you to create your own hybrid creatures by combining top and bottom halves of pages that had been bisected. I'd already made a book of my own using this as a model in the 1980s. This is it, Unmatched Halves, that did the same thing with drawings of tools and very short stories. That's scissors and a hammer right there. And here is the top of the scissors with the bottom of the hammer and the top of a rake with the bottom of a whisk. That January in 2021, I sat down one day and I started drawing imaginary mashups, combining ceramic elements from different eras and styles. Deco, Mezzo, Greco, unifying them with hairy surface treatments that hark back to some of that earlier work that I showed. That one on the right might be one of my favorites. It's a moche sex pot on top with a French chalice on the bottom. A few months in, it occurred to me I could actually make some of these things. At first, this process was entirely about enjoyment. I just got a bag of clay and started. We were still teaching online, and I really needed the pleasure of touching material, inventing something, truly the thing that has kept me going through all the ups and downs of my art world career. Gradually, the work has morphed through a series of developments from essentially trying to replicate the drawing in the form of a ceramic piece. The scale varies quite substantially with these. Into the current pieces, we'll get there in a minute. Oh, an entire body of work came out of this one thing on the left, which has to do with some kind of sacred root. Into the current work, which is unabashedly about hair, the female form, and containment. I use a combination of hand building and recycling the molds I used for wax pieces. See, take a look at this. See that one on the left? Yes, that third row down, it's the same mold. Good thing I didn't throw all those molds out, isn't it? And this was a show that I was in last year. I was in many shows last year. And finally, the last piece, just have to get through these. This is all the work from the last year. All right. The last piece of my current practice, aside from teaching and the occasional review, is continuing to write catalog essays. The first one was in 1986, and I think the total is presently somewhere between 130 and 140. There have been a few book contributions as well, including last summer's 16,000 word essay for a monograph on this artist, Isabella Kirkland, whose work is about species extinction. I write about whatever I'm asked to. I mean, I do say no sometimes, but rarely. But as the fashions of the art world has shifted towards craft-based work, so have my essays. There's that Brady essay that you mentioned on the top left corner. But I write about everything. Catalog writing used to be commissioned by galleries and still occasionally is, but mostly it's the artists themselves who are doing the asking. They feel the need for evaluation and description of their work, and though it's not the same as a review, it's also not that different, in my opinion, in the present climate. This picture accompanies an essay on my website, the title of which is How to Write a Catalog Essay. And it was a humorous piece, but that one blog post, or whatever you want to call it, has been accessed by thousands of people all over the world who want to know how to write a catalog essay. Really, I've been thinking about writing a book about that and selling it online. Anyway, artists feel this need for evaluation and description, but even though a catalog essay is not the same as a review, it's also not that different, in my opinion, in the present climate. Truly critical criticism seems to be one of the things that has fallen by the wayside. In any case, I don't try to hide from these artists who commission me that what I am doing for and with them is essentially hagiography, writing that describes and explains, putting their work in as flattering a light as is reasonable, contextualizing it within a bigger picture. I would be interested in hearing what any of you think about the similarities and differences are between such essays and writing reviews or profiles. A few days ago, I had coffee with a young woman who works for a gallery and writes about art. She told me that she was working on the possibility of a new publication, something online, Bay Area reviews. I'm in, I told her, and I bet there are a dozen others like me who not only could do this work, but would do it. You'd have to pay people something, but to get it going. She even seemed to think there might be some money for this thing somewhere, somehow. My fingers are crossed. In the meantime, I have a catalog essay to write, student theses to beat into shape, and work to finish. Thank you.
Very good.
Should I stop my share now?
Yes, go ahead.
All right.
Yeah. Few others have joined us. Some you may know, some not. But I'm curious as to your balance of writing and your artwork. If someone says, Maria, what do you do? Do you say, I'm a writer and an artist? I'm an artist who writes. I'm a writer who makes art also. How do you describe yourself?
It's contextual.
Okay.
Um, as teaching became a bigger part of my life, I've gone through, I'm not the kind of person who has to go into the studio every day. I meet artists who will say things to me like, if I don't paint every day, I get sick. And I think, wow, that's
Whoa.
impressive. And I go, for weeks or even months at a time. Thank God my studio is at home, so I'm not paying rent on it somewhere. That that was the smartest thing I ever did. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure I would have been able to continue having my art practice to this day.
Mhm.
Um, Now I think of myself as both a writer and an artist. And if somebody asked me that, maybe that would be my
Mhm.
response.
Mhm.
Um, it's definitely both, but
Yeah.
I could not say which is more important because I truly have been doing both my whole life. And I
Mhm.
really did think that those two things must be something that everybody could do. I figured if I could draw and write, then surely everyone else could do that too.
Yeah. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking about catalog essay versus um, criticism or a review, in one of the articles that are the reviews that I analyzed when I was doing my thesis was a review of a Richard Serra exhibition by Peter Sheldahl.
Hmm.
And I admired the fact, it was exactly what I was saying in my thesis. I admired the fact that he could take an artist such as Richard Serra, and he used the sandwich method, and he just I can't quote anything right now, but he would make a negative comment about the work and then a compliment. He sandwiched his compliment in between, so in between negative criticism, and it was brilliantly done. And I wouldn't know an artist that couldn't swallow it and take it to heart and not be offended by it. I thought
Well,
he
part
was
of the problem
brilliant.
is that the very short form that most reviews take
Hmm.
of 500 or 600 words, it's really difficult to say much of substance and say something both positive and negative.
Hmm.
The other thing I would I have to add about negative criticism, or even negative, it's not the right word. Criticism that is critical, it's very important. And I mean, Sheldon, the fact that Sheldon was critical of some of the things he wrote about was very important.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, however, as both an artist and a writer, very early in my career, I was tasked by Cecile McCann, the editor of Art Week, to review a show which I thought was incredibly pretentious. And I sort of made fun of it, not viciously, but parts of it, I couldn't help myself. And I turned the review in and I immediately had misgivings and I called her on the phone. She said, "I'm sorry, I have to run it." Because remember, this is back when if she didn't have a review to put in that spot, it would be an empty newspaper. That half of the page would be empty. There'd be nothing there. So with a heavy heart, I went home, and I always tell students, be careful what you are willing to live with, because the woman I was writing about was a professor at Mills College and succeeded in blackballing me from even being a visiting artist or giving a talk or anything for 25 years until she died.
Mm. Wow.
And other people who were on the faculty said to me, "Why is she so hell-bent on?" And I said, "Well, you know, her feelings were hurt."
Mm-hmm.
So I always
Yeah.
say it's possible that you have to think about what you can live with. I
Mm-hmm.
stand by what I said. The thing that I should not have done is been humorous about it, because this is serious business to the person you're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
I am really fascinated by the fact that clay and textiles are now materials of high art. Um, I feel like we've already passed the peak with clay. There was a point where every blue chip gallery in New York was showing ceramic sculpture. I feel like maybe because this is how it works in the art world, right? There's a trend. My
Mm-hmm.
terror, in fact, is that work by artists of color, which is so prevalent now, that it will be that gallerists will, in a couple of years, say to themselves, "Okay, well, I've done that now. I can move on." Instead of, I mean, I'd like to see a level playing field, but I certainly saw that happen for women artists. There was a moment when, uh, okay, let's just say that in the late 70s, when big galleries started showing women artists' work, like the important galleries in New York, there was that moment in the late 70s, more women were represented then than for the following 25 or 30 years. It's only come back to parity in the last decade or so. And even now, if you look at the rosters of galleries, even though the graduates of art programs are predominantly women, the artists who are showing are predominantly men.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Other people have questions because I could go on, but I'd love to hear what you want to ask or comment on to Maria. You're muted, Joe.
Sorry, I am mute because I have a dog sleeping on the couch next to me who likes to bark when we get a delivery. Maria, I do have a question, but first I have a compliment. I have to say I have followed your writing for many years, and I've always appreciated the thoughtfulness and the contextualization that you do in your writing. I always get something out of it. And for that, I am grateful because I don't always feel that way. There was a writer that used to write for, I think, Art Forum or Art in America, Nancy Princehoff.
Princenthal.
Right, Princenthal. And I would always savor all of her articles. There's just something, about that style of writing that works for me personally, because it's more, I'd say, uh, poetic in a way. It's, telling a story, not so overtly direct. But I did want to comment that I often write catalog essays too. But I understand when I am contracted to do it, it's an unspoken rule that they are not hiring you to be critical as a critic. They are hiring you to do critical writing, and they're
Yes.
two very different things.
Mhm.
And I would never accept an assignment about work of an artist that I did not appreciate. I may not understand it, but work that I just don't find engaging. I just could not write about it because I would feel that would be dishonest. Do you feel the same way, that you won't take assignments for as that article you wrote for Art Week of a show you didn't like? Would you consider writing for a catalog essay about someone's work who you don't consider to be, I don't know, meaningful, I guess?
Well, I think that there are, okay, I've written several essays for a glass gallery about artists who are prominent within the world of glass. And I do not judge that work by the same set of criteria or standards that I do other work that I write about. I feel that it deserves being assessed by the standards that are common within that world. And I use my skills at description and helping people to see the work and contextualizing it within that world to write about it. Would I seek to write those essays? Probably not, but I have enjoyed doing that work. I genuinely have. I was involved with the glass world for about a decade. And I met, and at the time, I remember meeting a fellow who yearned to be represented and shown within what he called the real art world. And I finally said to him one day, I don't understand what your problem is. You have this great, successful career. Your world has its own publications, its own collectors, its own galleries. You don't need that other world. And in that other world, your work wouldn't have the same meaning that it does in this world. Well, he didn't really want to hear that. I think what I'm trying to say is there have been a couple times when I've been asked to write an essay and I looked at the work and I was like, oh no, can't do that. I just can't do it. But I've written about people where I've initially had misgivings and discovered that the work was actually surprisingly interesting and worthwhile.
Mhm.
You know, that's a good way of looking at it. Sometimes we don't really know the inside energy of work until we really deeply investigate it. And we don't really have time to do that, at least for me, unless somebody hires me to do it.
Mhm.
You know, I don't have time to just investigate artists that I find curiously intriguing. So that is a bonus.
I will say
Mhm.
one thing, having done it a couple of times, I won't write essays about work that I cannot see in person unless there are really, extenuating circumstances, because it's just too hard. It's too hard to write about something based on online images.
Mhm. Mm.
I mean, we had to do a lot of things internet only during COVID, and it made me grateful for a world in which there are so many marvelous real objects that I can experience.
Mm. Do you find that there's a difference? You talked about the shift from galleries asking you to write, and that would be hiring you to write for a catalog essay, and then now the artist asking you. I mean, the
Well,
gallery doesn't
essentially,
want negative feedback
no,
either.
it's the
So,
same. It's the same.
yeah,
It just
okay.
means the galleries have shifted that part of the responsibility to
Mhm.
artists, which I think is rather unfair, but part of what has made it possible is that publishing a catalog is so much less expensive than it used to be. Plus, galleries, when printing was real printing rather than, say, print on demand, printing on presses somewhere, galleries would have to print a minimum of 1,000 catalogs or something. I remember one of the things that Berggruen used to complain about was how many catalogs he was stuck with from his artists. Like he had a whole, like one of those metal shelving units filled with boxes of these old catalogs. I think when they moved from one site to another, maybe he got rid of some of them. But it is not expensive to produce a catalog. The fee you pay the artist might be the most expensive part of it. So that's part of why I think gallerists, and also gallerists see that it doesn't help them sell the work. And that's the only reason. I mean, I've had gallerists say to me, I could do without a brick and mortar space. I could sell the work. I could build the relationships with the collectors. The only reason I still have a space is for the egos of the artists who want to have shows they can invite their friends to. But without publications, there is no record of people's work aside from their own websites, the gallery website. So I think that's part of the motivation that people have to pay for a catalog, because people really want there to be writing about their work that exists.
So you showed an extensive list of publications for whom you've written. What percentage of those that are still alive would you say you approached them as opposed to them approaching you?
I'm pretty sure that, okay, I had someone approached Art Forum for me. The woman who ran San Francisco Art Space with her own money was friends with Tony Corner, then the publisher of Art Forum. And she knew that the Bay Area writer of reviews, Bill Berkson, was tired of it. He was writing like 8 reviews a year and he had just had it. He was done. And she asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, absolutely, but there's no way that Art Forum is going to be interested in me because, well, many reasons. I was already writing for several other publications, but she said, give me your clips and I will submit them. He said yes. And they tried me out. That's the way it worked. But that was the only time that it wasn't just me writing directly to the publication saying, I would like to write for you. Here's my resume. Here's what I have published. And here are a couple of samples of my work. Frieze magazine turned me down. They said that they already had 2 writers in the Bay Area, and I never tried again. I've thought about it because now there's no one writing for Frieze from Northern California at all. I also wrote for Hyperallergic. I will never do it again. It was the most excruciating editing process imaginable.
You mean going back and forth with the editors that they kept asking you to revise?
The editor I was working with treated me in the most unpleasant, condescending way imaginable. She was like 22 and I think the first comment she wrote at the top of the review was, what is it they said you should do in journalism? Write what you know, write what you see. It's something like that. Whatever it was, that's what she wrote in caps across the top of my review. And I thought, this is not going to go well.
Oh.
And I wasn't joking about the verbifying nouns. It's a serious problem. And I have
It's
to
an
say,
American problem.
oh my God,
It's an American.
oh my God, it just makes my skin crawl.
I
I had
agree.
a friend since childhood, sort of my sort of a stand-in uncle who wrote for the New York Times for decades. And I wrote to him about this, and he wrote back and said, if anyone submitted anything to the Times with that word, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a verbified noun. He said it would not be acceptable.
That's funny. I still won't use the word prioritize.
Yeah.
But we love IZE.
Yes, and
And
just
not to get off on a tangent, but I think it's one of the real problems with the English language, at least, well, I think it's everywhere, but that common usage puts things in the dictionary and changes our opinions of usage. So we're playing to the lowest common denominator when we do that. But anyway,
well,
but
it's good for language to be a living thing, and this is one of the things that the French are the most aggressive about protecting the language.
yeah.
But that's how they've ended up with English loanwords in French,
Hmm.
like le shopping, which
Or
cracks me up.
computer or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Icelanders are that way too.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. But what I found when I was editing Ceramics Art and Perception and Ceramics Technical, well, particularly Ceramics Art and Perception, because I would approach the writer in the area. I had a good stable of writers. And then number one, it had been vetted because I had not seen the exhibition, but seen the promotional material.
mhm.
And it interested me enough to go find a writer. Then the writer would make a decision, like you talked earlier. I can't write about this, or I will write about it. But there was that vetting as well. And I had Sika has had this issue for a while in that there were a lot of ego exhibitions in which the curator would curate an exhibition around his or her own work. And I had writers say, no, I'm not going to write about this. This was curated around this work. And I'm really proud of the fact that now I do all the editing and proofing of the NSICA documents for the conference. And I'm really proud of the fact that now their catalogs say it was either organized by so-and-so or curated by so-and-so. And so the ego exhibitions are only organized. They're not curated. And I'm happy that NSICA is making that distinction. But yeah, so there is a vetting process when you're going out after the articles that happens. That means that maybe if the writer decides they're going to write about it, they feel positive about the work. And as Joe said, that doesn't mean that it can't be critically written.
So I never take commissions to write reviews. The editors at magazines, I approach them and say, so how about this show? If I haven't
Mm-hmm.
gone to see it, I will say, let me know if you're interested, then I will go see it and I'll tell you if I think it's any good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that has worked out pretty well. It's
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it was that early experience of writing something about something that I didn't want to write about. That's the reason why I became so adamant about this. If you write
Yeah.
about something that you're commissioned to write about, which you don't think is very good, how are you going to, well, there was a time in the early aughts, the 90s and the early aughts, there were a couple of people who wrote reviews for Art Forum who specialized in writing eviscerating reviews that were just, they loved writing about things that they thought were terrible and talking about how terrible they thought they were. But here's my feeling. There is so much art and so many beautiful objects in the world. Why waste the time, the space, the verbiage on something that is not valuable
Mhm.
for whatever reason, just to say this is crap. It's just
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense to me. So,
Yeah.
you asked if I think that I am, do I say I'm an artist or a writer? Um, right now, making work has become very compelling to me, yet I still write catalog essays and reviews, just not as many.
Mhm.
Like 3 reviews for art forum in a year, maybe 1 or 2 pieces for sculpture. That's kind of it on the critical front.
And sculpture's gone to themed issues, haven't they?
Not entirely. They will
Okay.
still have reviews and everything,
Reviews in the
just not
back,
very
yeah.
many. Plus, the website sometimes runs material that doesn't show up in the print magazine. That entire operation is run by 3 people. It's amazing.
Wow. Wow.
American Craft used to be like that. There's Lois Moran and Beverly. Oh, Beverly was the greatest. I think there were like 3 or 4 of them, and they did everything, the whole magazine.
Wow. Yeah. Hmm.
Yes. Be the
Judy.
question.
I appreciate you talking about Beverly and Lois. They were, at that time, they were in New York where I am. And Beverly was just an amazing, amazing person. I miss her terribly. I'm really, Maria, quite intrigued with your scope of writing and the range of your writing. And it's as a professor at NYU for so many years and having hired Peter Sheldall to teach critical writing at NYU um, um, with the editor of Craft Horizons. Her name just scoped me for the moment. God, I must be getting old.
Rose
Jenna
Lipka?
Kaplos?
Rose Lifka, right. So
Yeah.
I hired Rose Lifka, and then she introduced me to Peter Sheldall and then hired him. So I've always been interested on people that we hired to teach critical writing and to teach because you're working at basically with art students, are you not, at CCAC? So tell me your take on how you train or how you work with students to self-evaluate or to critically write about their own work in a way that is not self-congratulatory, but soul-searching and meaningful to them, because all the students have to write statements about their work. That's part of their, training as an art major. So how do you separate them from their self and self-aggrandizement, which we talked about before, but really analyzing and understanding where their work is coming from so that they can relate and have real meaning in what they're saying about their work?
We have a written thesis component to our MFA degree. Not all MFAs, or even most, include that requirement. And that's a program that I have essentially masterminded for the last, I don't know how many years. I believe that writing about other people's work is part of how you can achieve the objective distance to really do a deep dive into your own work. So part of what the thesis involves is what I describe as research. By this, I do not mean academic research necessarily, although some students who come from a university background elect to do that. But what I mean by research is often really looking carefully at the work of artists who are influential for you or whose work is meaningful for you. And by trying to figure out what is significant about that work, yeah, you read materials, but I ask them to really look at the work and think about it. By doing that, I don't know, between that and asking them to do that kind of deep dive into their own work, they'll often write 4 or 5 pages about a single piece of their own. And this is really different from writing an artist statement. Writing an artist statement is trying to figure out some cool sounding language that describes your practice as a whole, that will amaze people, that will then make them look at the work and think, oh, yes. Instead of that, I say, what are you really doing here? So part of what the thesis consists of research, writing about their own work in this thoughtful and in-depth kind of way. And I don't know, some of them write memoir, some add a poetry or fiction of some kind. The overall parameter is pretty loose beyond those requirements. 18 to 20 pages of writing, but as I always say, there is no word count. When you're done, you'll know you're done and I'll know you're done. And they're in the middle of it right now. It's so interesting to see what happens with students who feel that they don't have either the ability or the inclination to write, discovering that writing can actually make them better artists. That's my goal. I'm not really interested in anything else. And that's what writing for artists is really about. It's about showing them that this is one of the tools that graduate school equips you with. Grad school doesn't make people into artists. It gives them the tools to build their own practice. 18 months is way too short to turn somebody into an artist.
So we're kind of out of time, but I do have one brief question.
Thank
I
you.
think it's brief. And that is, how do you feel about what's been written about your work?
There hasn't been that much of it, but the things that have been written have generally been thoughtful. Some of them have been written by people who know me, and I think that must constrain what they're writing. But I guess I've always felt like because I can write, that some part of that responsibility falls on me. So there's a lot of writing on my website.
Okay.
I've been reviewed in major magazines, not too many times, and not for the work that I'm doing now because there aren't any magazines really left. So that is what I hope for. I hope that before I stop making art, that perhaps someone will write thoughtfully about my work and I will enjoy reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other final thoughts? But thank you so much, Maria, for being here. And
Thank you for asking me.
yeah, it's great. And Shamai, thank you for staying up late. Yeah.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks, Maria.
Bye, Maria. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. As always, I'm interested in suggestions for presenters. So Nancy Service has been good about doing that. If any of you have any thoughts, if it's someone in Israel, we can adjust our time a little bit. But yeah, but I'm always open to suggestions. So.
Has Janet DeBus spoken with us before?
Yes.
Okay. What about Peter Pincus?
No, he hasn't.
I have asked him to speak in my class. Of course, I haven't heard back from him, but I'll let you know.
Oh. I've tried to get Roberto Lugo and you can't get through to him. He's gone from a down-to-earth upbringing to
His handler.
You can ask Sharon, Elaine. Sharon.